We're still good to go. Testing. All right, I think we can start. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's session on the International Climate Councils Network. My name is Lebogang Molaisi. I'm the COO for the South African Presidential Climate Commission. And again, you're welcome to today's session. In terms of opening remarks, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that the International Climate Council Network was launched at COP26 and since then has grown into an effective global collaboration between science councils. This event will bring together independent advisory councils to explore the value of impartial science-based advice in the climate transition. Given the COP28 focused on the global stocktake, our keynote speaker, Professor Harold Winkler, who I just had a brief chat with and reflected on the fact that even though we're from South Africa, we only meet outside of the country, which is something we must fix, Harold. He will be reflecting on the core themes of the stocktake, including reflections on the ambition gap, building resilience for a warmer world, and financing mechanisms for a just and climate resilient scenario. With that said, I'd like to welcome to the podium Professor Harold Winkler from the University of Cape Town, who is also an UNFCCC, IPCC expert, just to make some opening reflections.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much, Lebo, for the introduction. And Lebo, you're welcome in Cape Town anytime. But yes, it is a problem that we don't actually talk at home. But I do want to. I've been over the last 2 years one of 2 co-facilitators of the technical dialogue of the global stocktake. I'm coming from B1, right? So I speak UNFCCC, and I apologize for that. I'll try and explain a little bit as Chippy asked me to. But so the global stocktake, when I say GST, is a very important mechanism. It's probably the main outcome of this COP. There are many other important ones. But really, it's talked about as the ratchet mechanism, right? So we know that when we add up what we all agree in nationally determined contributions, what in our political economy can work, when we add all of that up, and whether we add it up in terms of tons or in terms of money, or we try and think about how to pull that together in adaptation, it's not enough. And so every 2 years after the NDCs, we have this process, and that process itself collects information, in this case 170,000 pages worth of inputs. My colleague Farhan Akhtar from the United States and I co-facilitated 3 big meetings in the technical dialogue, which is finished, luckily. 8th of September we issued our synthesis report. And now there's a so-called political consideration about it. So now the politics mangles the beautifully crafted science. And, but it is a very important, because effectively what's at stake here is whether the Paris Agreement works or not, right? Because if we cannot do more, then, and we have nothing else, right? I think of the UN system a little bit like democracy. It's the worst possible system until you look at all the others, right? It's what we have, right? Short of real Wild West. The global stocktake also has an incredibly broad and I think relevant to what you posed, Lebo, scope. So it's about mitigation, it's about adaptation, it's about means of implementation, which means finance, technology, and capacity building, and loss and damage and response measures. And all of that, cross-cutting issues, are about ambition and equity, and equity is my favorite thing, ambition and equity, but both of those are based on the best available science. Everything is undertaken in the light of best available science, which means the IPCC reports, not only, but significantly those. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I see, personal remarks, how I see equity being framed and what's emerging, how it came into the synthesis report and what's happening now. And I think really that there are four important parts to how equity is framed in the global stocktake. And should be framed. The first is a framing statement, and I think what is emerging is a statement that equity should enable ambition. And that's, so those of you who follow text in the kind of context section of a decision, you would say things like that. And that's a normative statement of a should, so equity should enable, and what's behind that is a fear from many developed countries that equity is being used as an excuse to do nothing. And developing countries, I heard this loud and clear, and they're taking again and again, including the like-minded developing countries, including Saudi Arabia, saying that is not what we are saying. Right? We are saying we need the process, the just transition process, all the other processes, the change, these big system transformations are needed. They need to happen in a fair way, and they need to take into account where we're starting from. But we are saying this not in order to go backwards, but in order to go forwards. And so equity is a very important framing statement, is that equity can and should enable ambition. But you don't just want to make, the narrative is important, but you don't just want to make general preambular remarks. It needs to be operative, and equity needs to apply concretely in at least three important ways: in mitigation, adaptation, and finance. And so in mitigation, I think we have a paragraph in our synthesis report from the technical dialogue which lays out many, many ways of thinking about equity. Equitable allocation of carbon space. Everybody the extremes. Equitable allocation of carbon space. You take a global carbon budget, you decide, it's per capita, and you divide it up. Fantastic analysis, nobody will sign up to it, right? My own conclusion. Or you just say, no, if you each just do what, as much as you can, that's fair. Well, my mind, I don't see any fairness in that. And in between a whole lot of things, and I think it's in the in-between, in negotiations, you need to find the contract zone where people can find each other. And I think in mitigation, there are two places that I think are emerging where you can find each other. One are the just transitions, and I know that for the PCC, of course, this is your job, right, is to oversee the just transition in South Africa. And the just transitions, the plural is very important, because the just transition in South Africa is different to the one in the US or the UK or Malawi or Bangladesh or Indonesia, wherever it's happening. And the other is, and this is not only for mitigation, we are all parties must explain in the next NDC how our NDCs are fair and ambitious. This is language coming back from Lima in 2014, pre-Paris. It's in Paris. And it has been voluntary to have this information in the first NDCs. For the second NDC, it's mandatory. What you say about equity is up to you. Nobody can tell you. It's nationally determined. But you have to say something. And the NDCs, generally speaking, we as developing countries see those and have this as containing mitigation, adaptation, and support for both of those. Generally speaking, developed countries focus on the mitigation part of those, and so the NDC, fairness and ambition, is a bit of a bridge between the mitigation and the adaptation. In adaptation, I think that's also really interesting. So firstly, there are some statements about injustice. And we say, and it's true, and we must keep on saying this, that those who are least responsible suffer most from the impacts and have least ability to adapt to them, precisely because these are poor people and communities in all countries. Those people don't all live in poor countries. They also live in some richer countries. And that's a fundamental injustice, and we must take climate action in a way that doesn't exacerbate those inequalities. And then a concept that I thought emerged from me, those are statements about injustice and what should not happen, but what should happen, this concept that has emerged of just resilience. It's a little bit like applying just transitions in the adaptation space. That's one way of thinking about it. It's also thinking about it in terms of, well, what is resilience? Resilience is when you bounce back from something negative, an impact that you've suffered, or even loss and damage that you've suffered, and you need to bounce back. That's resilience. That can happen in a way that is fair or not fair, and I think that's something that I certainly hope that the PCC in South Africa will explore, maybe other councils that are part of this network. But I think so. And then lastly, of course, finance is fundamental to equity as well. The question of who pays, and of course, again, there's this whole rather divergent discussion about, well, is it about obligations, under Article 9? Is it about broader fund, which are essentially flows of public finance from developed to developing countries? And there are existing, the Paris Agreement does refer to existing obligations, but it also says that this mobilizes broader support and also has the goal of financial flows and they're very important. The language there is very important. It's a pathway of making those finance flows consistent with climate resilient and low emissions development. Development is a very important word in that. It's not to make finance flows align with Paris, is to inform a particular kind of development. The most important thing there in my mind is that we have both of those. It is a matter of equity that developed countries do not step back from obligations, but it's also very clear that we need to look at a much broader set of financial flows, both international and domestic, both public and private, but that they're applied in a way where effectively, when the capacities of some countries to really fund the mitigation, the adaptation, and to recover from loss and damage is exceeded, that there is international support. And this really goes to, and we're hearing this in the rooms, this goes to coming back to some of the normative elements, to things like solidarity, to hope and trust. And not addressing finance and the finance gap is probably the most important matter of trust. So, Lebo, shall I wrap up there, or have I got another minute? Another minute, okay. So that was my piece on equity in the global stocktake, picking that out, and so I think it needs to be framed as equity should enable ambitions. I think in mitigation, we should speak about just transitions and fair shares. In adaptation, I think just resilience, apart from the statements, and in addition to the statements about injustice, is very important, and fundamentally, how finance is arranged is a matter of equity. I want you to reflect just a little bit, because I'm not familiar with this network. It's very interesting to see this collaboration. I do, of course, the PCC is a really interesting space in our political discussions. But I just wanted to reflect a little bit back to you as an academic. When I read the literature of what organizations, in my limited understanding of the kind of council that are here, what role they might play. And my good friend Navros Dubash has written about 3 broad outcomes of what such councils might do. And, they might set strategy, build consensus, and coordinate implementation. And I think those are really, really important. And he also speaks to analytical and deliberative functions. And I think what's particularly interesting in processes like just transition is that middle one of the first 3. So the other way of expressing building consensus is mediating conflict. And I think it's a key function. It can be a key function. I'm not sure, depending on what body you are, basically saying, well, surprise, surprise, maybe the energy minister and the environment ministers don't have exactly the same. Never mind before you talk to big energy companies and in the country compared to an environmental NGO. Clearly, there are different voices. Clearly, therefore, you've come from the labor movement. What Kosatu says is a different perspective to what others say. And that is really critical to building that in. But how that function relates to the analytical, I think, is one that is worth some quite deep reflection, and how councils bring advice. Of course, I'm a professor at the university, and I would think that we have some role to play in giving independent advice, and how you keep the independence of the science, keep that voice, speak from that voice. But clearly that information needs to be brought into, that information only really makes a difference, in my view, if it's brought into this process where you're mediating conflict in order to build consensus. So I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. You touch on a very important point at the end about how the analytical part and the actual evidence is a key ingredient to mitigating the conflict, especially when you seek to build consensus, because that's what we're trying to do. The difficult task of every climate council or commission is the very difficult task of trying to build that consensus. Thank you very much for your inputs. I know you are pressed for time today. So with that said, I'm just going to invite Rick Smith from the Canadian Climate Institute to come in and just give us some opening reflections before we kickstart our panel discussion. You can come to the podium.
Thank you very much, Lebo. It's a real pleasure to be here at the South African Pavilion, a pleasure to be here with colleagues from around the world. And my charge today is just to I think, take a couple of minutes and reflect on the ICCN, what we're doing together, and the role of climate councils around the world. As Lebo mentioned off the top, we were founded, publicly launched after some period of discussion at COP26. And so we've spent the last 2 years coming together as a network, and we're now about 25 independent national councils around the world on multiple continents from very different countries in the global north and the global south. But we share some characteristics. We are independent, we are expert, we are evidence-based, and our job is to advise our respective national governments on the best way forward with respect to mitigation and adaptation. From our council's point of view, we're new. We were actually founded, like many of our councils, not all, but many. We were actually founded, publicly launched just a couple of years ago, January 2020, and we've been trying to learn, fly the plane at the same time as we're building it, and trying to navigate this complicated climate change terrain. So from our point of view, it's been enormously useful to collaborate with international councils, including councils that are longer standing than we, because at the end of the day, you couldn't ask for a more international challenge than climate change. And yes, one that has differences by national jurisdiction, but at the end of the day, more similarities than not. In preparing for this panel today, I actually just spent a couple of minutes last night looking at our relatively new ICCN website. And what we've been asking our 25 member councils over the last couple of years is to post important new research products, important new national assessments, deep dives into the specific cornerstones of good climate policy, clean electricity, national adaptation strategies. So I'd encourage you all just to take a couple of minutes and surf that still very new, kind of a little bit clunky website, but I'm not sure you'll find a better aggregation of smart national level climate change thinking than that website. And we've really only begun together. Our Korean colleagues have posted their recent national assessment of Korea's progress. Our Irish colleagues regularly post their kind of benchmarking of Ireland's progress. Our Philippines colleagues have been posting their work on adaptation in the Philippines. And of course, the Presidential Commission has been posting their important work, their important assessment, guidance, strategy. As the professor mentioned, I think his 3 criteria were right on in terms of our value add. So you see dozens of important benchmarks, assessments, suggestions in terms of how we can improve climate policy together. And I think it gives you an indication of the impressive collective impact we're having, and we're really just getting started. We joke in our council that our true mission in life, and I think maybe there's some similarities with other councils, our true hidden secret mission, not to be found on our website, not to be spoken of during daylight hours, but our true mission in life is to make climate change policy really boring. That is our mission, to make climate change boring. Our country, I think like South Africa, I know like the Philippines, like Korea, climate change policy in our country is contentious. It is dramatic. It is highly political. It is subject to overheated rhetoric, important stakeholders in our country talking past each other. We have 2 official languages, so literally talking different languages at the same time. And so I want to be clear what we mean when we whisper to each other quietly that our ambition is to make climate change boring. We don't mean boring in terms of uninteresting. Because at the end of the day, our councils aspire to relevance, we aspire to impact. And so by definition, we need our products, our research, our tracking to be engaging, to be timely. So when we say boring, we don't mean uninteresting. When we say boring, though, what we mean is consistent. We're headed towards next federal election. We may well see, we'll see, it's a volatile period. We may see a governmental change. And so our job is to advise our federal government, regardless of which party is in power, and to try as best we can to maintain momentum for the climate discussion, and to carry our country's new climate change policy architecture through volatile periods with some consistency and some better resilience. We do this in a variety of ways, and I think these are some of the things that bring our councils together. We try to root climate change discussion in our country in fact. We try to deploy the best possible analysis. And we try to, one of the ways, I know it's the same in South Africa and other countries, one of the things we try to do is to ensure the climate change discussion is inclusive. One of the sources of volatility of the climate change debate in our country is that some stakeholders, some rights holders in our country, we have very, very large, important indigenous nations with constitutional guarantees. And one of the sources of volatility in our climate discussion has been some voices in our country chronically absent or chronically excluded from the climate change discussion. That needs to change, and part of our mission is to ensure that, to guarantee that inclusivity. So in this way, whether it's rooting the discussion in a fact basis, ensuring an inclusive discussion, our councils, our 25 councils and growing, and our biggest challenge, frankly, over the last couple of years, getting the ICCN up and running, has been dealing with a regular influx of new nascent councils being established in countries all over the world, and trying to deal with their membership applications, trying to help them get off the ground. That's a pretty good problem to have as a new organization, trying to deal with the pressures of growth. But collectively, our councils contribute to good governance, and we have an indispensable role in enriching the climate change discussion in all of its complicated manifestations, and moving our countries forward together in terms of the economic and social facets of good climate policy. So I don't want to impose our self-reflections on other councils, but I do think there are some similarities. I look forward to advancing with our existing 25 members and our growing membership base. I look forward to advancing our glorious, important, boring mission together. And I look forward to the rest of this event today as a tangible contribution to this important climate change issue at this moment in time. Thank you so much to South Africa for hosting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for those inputs, Rick. I think the Canadian example is very much like the South African example in many ways, especially when it comes to climate policy. I think we strive to make climate policy explosive as opposed to boring. But that's a conversation for another day. And I thought it was just South Africans that like to build planes as they're flying them. So that's another thing that we definitely have in common. But it's good to see that a lot of countries are starting to identify with the need to have climate councils of this nature, because the idea of collaborating with stakeholders that don't naturally have a voice in these types of discussions is important for them to have. So I'm going to move swiftly along to the panel discussion. I'm going to invite 3 of our panelists to join me right up here in front. I'd like to welcome Desigan Naidu from South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission. From the Danish Council on Climate Change, I'll also like to invite Ulla Blatt Benson. And then from the Finnish Climate Change panel, I'll also like to invite Markku Ollikainen to join me in the front to start our panel discussion. Round of applause as they approach the front. I don't know about you, but I'm incredibly relieved to be sitting for this session. So welcome to this panel discussion, and thank you for availing yourselves to be a part of this discussion. We're just going to go through a couple of questions and then just take some reflections, and then hopefully when time permits, we'll then open it up for a quick panel discussion with the rest of the participants that have joined us here today. So I'll start with you, Ulla. Just reflecting on the report, looking at Denmark's global climate action, the Council has identified 10 focus areas in which Denmark can contribute to the global discourse on emissions reduction. Just maybe from you, Ulla, if you could give us just a highlight on which 10 areas is the most relevant and responsive to the call for rising ambition gap as outlined in the global stocktake.
Hello? Hello? It's good? Okay. Well, thank you very much also for inviting us to be in the panel. I think before I go into the report, I'd say the most important thing is that we deliver on our domestic obligations, and we have as a council 3 years in a row said that we are not on track to delivering our domestic obligations. Although we get closer, we're not on track. But even if all NDCs were implemented, as Harold said, we're far from the Paris temperature goals. So we need to do more than that. And that's why we have just issued this report on the most important channels by which Denmark can influence and our emissions abroad. And if I were to point to maybe the 3 most important things of the 10 focus areas that we mention in the report, I think it would be our consumption footprint, international transport, and finance. First, the consumption footprint. If you look at the consumption footprint from all our imports in Denmark, including those imports that are embedded in the production of export goods, it amounts to 200 million tons per year, This is 4 times higher than our territorial emissions. We need to do something about that, and we recommend in the report that the government sets a benchmark for reducing the consumption footprint. We don't say exactly how much, but we do say that if we are to be Paris-aligned, this needs to be reduced by 50 to 60% by 2035. The next thing is international transport. There we recommend that a net zero goal, is included in the Danish Climate Act. And this is inspired by the UK, who already has this act in their carbon budget, 6th carbon budget. And it's also inspired by France, that has recommended this to the French government back in 2019. It's a target for the bunkering of aviation and ships in Danish ports. And we also recommend that there should be intermediate targets on the way. And then finally, it's finance. Denmark should have a benchmark for meeting our fair share of the agreed finance goal. We also say that there should be a balance between adaptation and mitigation, and because the private financial flows are mostly, they want a return, we say that more than half or a larger share should go into adaptation, and also highly concessional finance. Both grants and highly concessional finance should flow through to adaptation. And the last thing we say on finance is that the government has a target of swifting from black to green finance in this long-term financial goal in the Paris Agreement. But it's very fluffy, so we say they need to make a clear strategy. What do they mean by this? And to influence the private sector, banks, institutional investors, and so on, to put finance into away from fossil fuels and into green investments. So I think I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ulla, from that. I think what's important is that benchmark for agreed finance goals. Because if you don't do that, all the finance flows in the direction of mitigation, which seems to be the standard practice, and you have very little to nothing left in terms of adaptation. With that said, Desigan, let me invite you then. South Africa was the first to conclude a financing mechanism outside the multilateral process. What are the dynamics to this financing model, and what are the key learnings? And I mean, if you could just briefly reflect on that conundrum of finance always going in the direction of mitigation, and what the South African example has been.
Thanks, Lebo, and good morning, everybody. Just before I get into that, just to say that the ICCN as a partnership expression is invaluable. These climate councils around the world as the premier translation bridges, if you like, between the pledges and the signs into practical action is something that we all need, and we all need really rapidly. So the growth of this entity from the 25 councils to eventually having possibly hundreds in the future is something that's a very valuable trajectory. But around these deals, I mean, the first thing to take from the energy transition partnerships is an expression of a global solidarity, a global partnership to make this move for global good. I know that the orientation of the discussions is largely around the beneficiary countries, but it's about way more than the beneficiary countries. Because one of the expressions that has taken root inside the ICCN, which is really valuable, is this understanding that the global south is probably our best pilot opportunity for what a real low carbon economy looks like. So this is a global investment in organizing for these pilots to flourish in the kind of way that organizes for us to have a global formula or a couple of models on how this works. The second thing to take from the JETP mechanisms and now the surrounding mechanisms associated with the broader climate finance discussion is the ability of these international catalytic gestures to actually mobilize local investment. And that's a massive factor. I mean, one of the things that's in the climate finance landscape report of South Africa, which is going to be launched officially later today, is that 91% of the finance is in fact domestic investment in South Africa, and that's quite unique in the developing world. We want to organize for those kinds of numbers to be replicated in many more places. The third issue is that energy is a central discussion in every economy. So while we're talking energy around this JET deal in South Africa, we're actually having a discussion about the structure of the future economy of the country. Because you can't talk energy without talking about your industrial pathways. You can't talk energy without talking about your investment pathways and your growth pathways. So it's become really fundamental in all of those. And maybe the last point to put into that mix, which is often overlooked, is that our ability to be more climate resilient, our ability to adapt better, and my goodness, we need to adapt. I mean, the location of this COP in Dubai may be deliberately to remind all of the people who have more moderate temperatures that this is your future. So, Marco, Helsinki is going to be, Helsinki is going to be as hot as this if we don't get it together. But the reality is that, one, to make the adaptation real, you do need the finance and you do need the energy. Energy is a really, really pivotal part around organizing for us to be in a better adaptive capability inside the system. Let me pause there for now.
Thanks so much for that, Desigan. And just to reflect on the point, and this is not because I'm from the Global South, but making the point that the Global South is the best pilot for what a low-carbon economy could potentially look like, and I think that's definitely very important for us to take away. I just want to take this opportunity to welcome the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy for South Africa, who's joined us here today. Siyakwamukela. Welcome. Minister Gwede Mantashe, he's here with us. He's sitting at the back. So anybody that wanted to say hi to him is more than welcome to do so. Marco, I'll come back to you. Maybe just to reflect on the Finnish panel. You guys have been quite engaged and you've been quite concerned about ensuring that there's inclusion in your panel. What has the experience been on the ground that you can share it with us? And which groups were previously excluded that you've managed to now include in the panel?
Okay, this works? Yes. Well, inclusion is really important for the success of any climate policy, mitigation or adaptation. We need to hear all voices, we need to hear all needs, and we need to engage everyone to climate policy. And that's why we think that the equity and social justice are at the heart of both mitigation and adaptation policy. And therefore, we have devoted much effort to clarify what sort of issues we should take into account when we design policies so that they really are just and they are inclusive. And one of the things that we have suggested to our policymakers is that they always make a test or check the policies in terms of key justice notions like distributive justice relating to advantages and disadvantages that the climate or policy causes, not only monetary terms, but also environment and amenities things. The second is recognition justice, which means that that they really make it sure that everyone is heard, everyone can talk, and every lifestyle is somehow taken into account. We think that this recognition is the key to inclusion. We have noticed, and I know that Europe has a problem, For instance, concerning countryside, the rural lifestyles are different from the city styles, and also the problems and the worries are different from. And we have noticed that taking care of kind of, let's say, this distribution is not enough. Give compensation, but if you have not heard the word, heard the voice that comes from the certain groups, then distributive justice is not enough. They are not satisfied, they don't find it kind of equitable. And therefore we think that this recognition is the key. If I think my country, Finland, or if I think Nordic countries, there are certain people whose voice especially needs to be heard. One is the indigenous people of Sami people, and they are those that already now suffer most from global warming and the changes in the nature that are currently, let's say, crucially weakening the possibilities for reindeer herding, which is one of the basic kind of income source to Sami people. So that's why actually it was a good thing that the Finnish government made a decision to establish a Sami Climate Council. So it is, to my knowledge, the first climate council for the indigenous people, in this case Sami people in Finland, and it started its work last summer. I've been as a part kind of helping the council to start its work. And the other thing which I think is super important for all Nordic countries is that how we take into account the voice of future generations. For that we don't have so kind of or developed approaches, but that is one of the most crucial things. But therefore we have kind of prepared let's say some tables for policymakers that they need to answer certain questions concerning all these, the three types of justice concepts: distribution, recognition, and procedural justice, so that they can somehow ensure that they have taken into account all relevant aspects and all relevant voices. So recognition and inclusion, they go hand to hand, to my mind.
Thank you very much for that, Marco, and just reflecting on the fact that, recognition of groups that are vulnerable and that are disadvantaged is probably where we should start as the climate councils, but also for policymakers to also take into consideration. With that said, I want to include our participants. I want to check if anybody would like to ask our panelists a couple of questions. I'll just check by an indication if anyone has a question, would like to raise their hand, say something. We're going to start with, okay, we'll start with you, Sasha, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi. Oh, wow, it's loud. I suppose I'd be interested in hearing from any of you about how you take messages from the COP and take them back to your domestic context and make sure that governments aren't attending, saying things, and then going home and forgetting about it.
Sure, thank you. Just want to check if there's any more. All right. If there's anyone that would like to respond to how the messages that come from this COP, then, we do take it back to the councils, and they actually inform the work of the council. So this is not just something that we do and then we go back home. I'll just allow anyone to take that question, and then we'll head over to the next question. Sure, Marco.
If I may start, we have a meeting of our climate change panel December 15, and COP28 is on the agenda as the biggest thing, meaning that we will discuss about how we evaluate what is the outcome of this. We will discuss about how we could, as a national panel, but also within the ICCN community, to bring more value added to the achievements that we have, and also possibly how we can fix the failures that this COP might entail. But this is the conventional every year procedure that we have in the Finnish climate change panel.
Thank you. Let me just take, did you want to add something quickly, Ula, and then we'll take the next question. Sure, you can go.
Yes. Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
We also we have an annual report where we make a status about the territorial emissions, but we have a global chapter there, and we reflect on every COP in the global chapter. And apart from the official negotiations, or these are also part of the official negotiations, there are a lot of initiatives taken, like beyond oil and gas, the methane initiatives, and all these things. And governments are very quick at signing these and coming home, we did this, we did that. So we take them on these obligations. So what are we doing about methane emissions in Denmark? What are we doing to phase out oil and gas exploration in the North Sea? So this is how we also look at what comes out of the COPs and make sure that they don't forget what they promised.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to take one question here, and then I'm going to take another question there. The mic, oh, you've already got it.
Thanks. Hi there, sorry, it's Dave, I'm from South Africa, Member of Parliament. I just want to find out from you, as relatively low emitting countries or contributors to global emissions, the balance between adaptation and mitigation measures is something that gets discussed quite often. Obviously, steps need to be taken by the developing world to put mitigation measures in place. But as the countries that are more than likely going to be the most severely impacted, should we not be aiming to put more of an emphasis on adaptation so that those countries don't end up facing more severe and catastrophic impacts as a result of climate change?
Okay, and then I'll take the last question and we'll give back to the panel to respond.
Thank you, and also for the excellent presentations that we've had this morning so far. I'm also from South Africa. We heard a little bit from Rick in his intervention about how fractious the engagements around climate policy development as well as implementation can be, particularly for local people. A lot of this discussion that's been happening here has also very much been kind of facing policymakers and influencers, and also around, how do we engage the multilateral system? So my crisp question here is really about how do we bring people along, particularly the most affected? How do we do the social communication that facilitates their buy-in into the process, especially when they have something or even a lot to lose as a result? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take Julia as the last question, and then, Julia, you're abusing your special relationship with me.
Thank you, Lebogang. I wanted to ask, how is the ICCN kind of deciding which entities within each country to partner with? Kind of how do you join the network? How are the different councils funded? Are they always kind of government advisory bodies? Are they sometimes academic bodies? How do you determine who's in them? And I guess kind of logistically, who is and who isn't in this council, and how do you kind of position yourselves relative to some of the international kind of academic research councils, I guess?
Sure, thank you. Was there a last one? Okay, so I'm going to be completely South African and say last.
Okay, well, perhaps I've been given one too. So I'm Piers Forster, and I'm currently chair of the UK Climate Committee. And what I'd like to really like to ask you all is that we did hear from kind of Rick at the beginning about trying to be really dull and boring, and I completely agree with that, but at the exact same time, we have to convey a sense of urgency as well that comes with that. So So I just like to wonder the way we can all rise to that challenge, really.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask the panel to do something really impossible, but walk with me. You're going to respond to these questions and tie it together with your closing remark. So good luck to you. Des, again, I'm going to start with you.
No problem, Rebecca. We're happy to do that. And I want to tie it in with the previous question about what happens after COP as well, because it's really important. I mean, I'm assuming that, like South Africa, all of our other CCN partners, I'm sure of it, have worked out where this COP fits into their strategy. And there's a narrative that has to continue. And South Africa is a noisy democracy. And we're certainly going to be talking about this in not so calm terms after the COP. I can give you that assurance up front. But it goes beyond that as well, because there's an African narrative that's equally important, and South Africa is very much part of that. I mean, we had the inaugural African Climate Summit this year, which created with the Nairobi Declaration the expectation from COP, and we're going to get together again after COP to see where it has fallen short and what we're going to do with that. So there's a vibrancy. But the second thing I want to put out there is that one of the special jobs of climate councils is this translation bridge. It's not about repeating the rhetoric that's out there, but molding that into a problematique that can get the kinds of action that is required. And that is the responsibility that I think that we take. In particular, this question about all these players are having these fractious discussions at a particular level of the game without sufficient inclusion of the people who really matter. So part of the job of the councils is to make that happen. So, I mean, the PCC in South Africa, for example, is a social compact designed to engage that very specifically, and this is the thing that we must do. And my close-out comment is this, actually. I mean, what we should be doing around this is building out this global partnership and this global solidarity. It's absolutely key. Because one of the things that we have to reinvest in the system is this notion of climate Ubuntu. Because the reality is it is possible to get to a low-carbon economy in a world that is even more unequal than the one that we are in now. And we must make sure that we have exactly the opposite of that. The second is that there is no limit to how much we can actually share. And that sharing has to go up several notches in order for us to achieve what we want to do. And if we manage to do this, maybe we can have slightly calmer discussions, not necessarily boring discussions, around the practical ways to build our societies on the back of good climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marco?
Okay, I say a couple of general words concerning adaptation. I think that there are many issues that are actually joined to this whole globe concerning adaptation. They relate to health, they relate to good water, they relate to possibilities of having food. So we need a lot, we need to devote a lot of effort to solving these things. And we have means, we have lots of means nowadays to do so. Given that in addition to traditional agriculture, we are having these new solutions where we can manufacture proteins in bioreactors without using fertilizers, without using pesticides, herbicides, and things like that. And health, food, and water are joint challenges. And I think that the developed countries should devote lots of effort to making these solutions available and making them kind of mature technically. Then there are lots of things that are local concerning adaptation, and there we can only have local solutions. And for those, actually, it's quite surprising, but it's not only so that it's the South that needs to adapt a lot. Actually, the Arctic area is in the same position. And therefore, we need differentiated solutions, and we need much initiatives. But of course, the flow of adaptation funds should go from north to south. That is of course evident. Concerning this climate change committees, and these are scientific. ICCN consists of committees that are independent and scientific committees. But there are also in this world other types where there are scientists and let's say, stakeholders are in the same kind of panel. But this science-based means that we are impartial, we are independent, and we are science-based. And therefore, the recommendations and the policy things that we do suggest to our governments are always based on science. Our special task is to translate the key scientific research to a form that the policymakers understand, and also to do some kind of service, additional studies, so that the shift from the, let's say, poor science to applicable conclusions can be made. And in that, we should be good. And I hope that we are.
Thank you for that, Marco. Ulla, you have the last word.
Okay, thank you. This is a bit challenging, but maybe I start with Piers. Is it boring, and how do we communicate urgency? We write boring reports, but we have communication people, and they are able to find exactly, okay, you flunk the government again. So that's what goes into the press. The Danish Climate Council flunked the government for the third time in a row. So that's what you read in the press, and that's the kind of urgency that journalists will definitely find the urgent words that we do write among a lot of other scientific words. So I think the communication of our work is also really, really important. Yes, more focus on adaptation, I agree. Climate finance needs to go more into adaptation. But if we don't also finance mitigation, temperatures are going to rise to far above 3 degrees, so we need to do both. Because otherwise, we're all going to be flooded. And yes, I think you said very much about how to be a climate council. And I think many of the councils are rooted in the climate laws. So our main mandate is actually written into the Danish climate law. We have a lot of other advisory councils in Denmark on climate, but we're the only ones that are written into the law. And last, what can we get from working together in the ICCN? I think we can inspire, and by inspiring each other, we can do more. And I think our latest report is an example of this. We were inspired by the UK and France for our transportation goal. We were actually also inspired by Sweden on our consumption recommendation, and we were inspired by South Africa on finance. So I think we can really do much more, and it helps a lot when we advise the governments. We can say that we're not the only council saying this. There are councils around the world that say the same thing, and it actually makes our arguments a lot stronger. So with this, I really look forward to an intensified and broadened collaboration within this network. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for the panel, please. All right, we're almost at the end. I'd just like to invite Sasha Abrahams to come to the podium to give us some closing remarks.
I wonder if I'm too short for this mic. I might have to bend it down a bit. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much to our speakers. It's been super interesting, and thank you, South Africa, to hosting. I think that these kind of events do show what the value of the ICCN can be, that we're bringing councils together to talk about our ideas, inspire each other to take things back home and improve our own work. So I think it's a good example of what our network can do. I think today it'd be interesting to reflect on the last 2 years of the ICCN. So we launched at COP28 2 years ago, and I think 2 years along, we can be proud of how far we've come. I think there are a few things that we've done. So firstly, we've established a bit of a rhythm in how we interact with each other. there are lots of different things that our network does. So we meet formally, regularly throughout the year. We come together for workshops to discuss technical issues and pieces of work that we're all doing. But I think there's also an informal side to this where we have developed relationships between different councils. We've gotten to know each other. And in many ways, that's sometimes the most valuable thing. I think I've really valued some of the relationships I've built up with other councils where we have very technical discussions about some of our assumptions and our modeling, but then we also call to check in with each other when we know that their council is going through a difficult time, big changes, and I think that's invaluable because it's not always easy being a climate council. I think there are lots of challenges thrown your way. You take a lot of responsibility for what happens in your home country, so it's nice to have the wider network of support. I think that we've done a lot in the 2 years, but we also do struggle to keep up with the demand of how many people want to join, how much our members want to do with each other, and I think that we can safely say that we do need a bit more support to make sure the network can keep growing. So I'm very happy to say that we do have that support and we will be growing. So we've been very, very lucky to receive a generous grant from the European Climate Foundation to help grow the network, and we're really, really pleased to receive that. And that means a few different things for our network. So firstly, it will mean really importantly that we can set up a secretariat, and that will be a permanent secretariat dedicated to the ICCN, which will be hosted in E3G, who are very, very experienced in hosting secretariats and organizations like this. And this secretariat will enable so many new things to happen in the ICCN. It will mean that members can be brought together much more seamlessly. It's better than me doing it, I can promise you that. It will be much better for everyone involved. It will mean that we can be more creative about how we bring members together. It can happen more frequently, and it will hopefully be a smoother and slightly more professional experience for everyone involved. It also means that we can start thinking about how we help new and fledgling councils in the way that we've always wanted to. I think we know how hard it is to start off as a climate council. The CCC in the UK is 15 years old, and we still feel very new, and we're one of the oldest ones. So we've all gone through the experience pretty recently of starting up, and we want to be able to share that experience with other people. And this just gives us a bit more capacity to do that. And there are so many people interested in starting climate councils from all over the world. So like Desigan said, I think we're going to be expanding very rapidly, and that's a very exciting prospect. And finally, I think that with more support, we can start to see members coming together in person more frequently, us all actually getting to be involved in the ICCN in a way that we all want to. So I'm very pleased that's happening. So I wanted to say thank you to ECF for supporting us. Thank you for E3G for taking on the Secretariat. And also just a big thanks to all of the organizations, host governments, even if a lot of the time they do hate us, they've also allowed us to continue and allowed us to present our advice. And I think the ongoing interest in the work of the climate councils and the work of the ICCN just helps us do our jobs better and reminds us that it is important work that we're all doing. So very grateful for that. And I would finally say just a big thanks to all of those in the ICCN that helped us get where we are today. We're very lucky on the steering committee to be the ones that are around for the big moment and the big moment of growth, but there are previous steering committee members who also helped us get here. There are lots of members of staff who did a lot of the work on these proposals and are now in different roles. So I just wanted to say a big thanks for all those people that went above and beyond to make all of this happen.
Thank you, everyone. That's the end of our panel.